In a move that exposes a disregard for biological reality, a lack of understanding about the separation of powers, and contempt for what is or is not written in the U.S. Constitution, Julia Kobick, a judge for the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, April 18th, sided with the American Civil Liberties Union's motion for a preliminary injunction against Donald Trump making U.S. passports conform to biological reality, telling him to make no changes until a suit over the issue can be adjudicated in the U.S. justice system. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRCTV, and here's the story. The Associated Press reports that the order, quote, blocked the Trump administration from enacting a policy that bans the use of the X marker used by non-binary people on passports, as well as the changing of gender markers, end quote. And they also offer key background, but of course, they slant it to avoid mentioning what is biological reality, opting instead to adopt a pretense of balance by mentioning that the Trump policy change is frowned upon by major medical groups. Quote, in an executive order signed in January, the president used a narrow definition of the sexes instead of a broader conception of gender. The order says a person is male or female, and it rejects the idea that someone can transition from the sex assigned at birth to another gender. The framing is in line with many conservatives' views, but at odds with major medical groups and policies under former President Joe Biden, end quote. Let me ask you, do you need major medical groups to tell you the difference between a biological male and a biological female? How about this? Do security personnel, police, and EMTs, do they need amorphous, fantastical sobriquets to handle potentially life-threatening situations? Or do they need biological facts? On behalf of 7 clients, the ACLU claims the policy, quote, would effectively mean transgender, non-binary, and intersex Americans could not get an accurate passport, end quote. But this assertion hinges on the idea that accuracy in identification documents should prioritize self-perception over biological facts. It's a curious stance, one that assumes the state's role is to validate personal identity, and one that the tax-consuming judge finds to actually be meritorious and something that the Trump policy change would somehow jeopardize. Quote, the executive order and the passport policy on their face classify passport applicants on the basis of sex and thus must be reviewed under intermediate judicial scrutiny, Kobick wrote. That standard requires the government to demonstrate that its actions are substantially related to an important government interest. The government has failed to meet this standard, end quote. In other words, is one to take it that a government-issued identity document, a document that many other nations check when arriving in their airports and seaports, and something the U.S. government requires of us in order to re-enter the nation, is that not supposed to identify the sex of the individual at all? Even as the government pushes Real ID biometrics on us as a requirement to get into federal buildings and on planes, which of course is completely contrary to the Bill of Rights, and soon perhaps onto trains, this judge tells us that one of the key markers of identity, being male or female, isn't important for the actual process of government identification. If you detect conflicting signals from the government overlords who deign us too foolish to handle our own lives and security, who force us to pay for courts and for their police and guards and airport security theater, Well, you're not alone. Quote, "We all have a right to accurate identity documents, and this policy invites harassment, discrimination, and violence against transgender Americans who can no longer obtain or renew a passport that matches who they are," ACLU lawyer Shruti Swaminathan said, end quote. Which, of course, is a complete reversal of reality. A person's fantasy and role play is not who he or she is. God delivers us into the material world and fashions us from matter given life. No matter how people dress up that life or try to mutilate it, that life is, for the vast majority of humans, either male or female. And to pretend otherwise is to undercut the argument that the government ID has any valid purpose at all. But perhaps that's the point. Thanks for watching, one and all. Please like and subscribe and share these videos far and wide, especially from Rumble, where they don't censor us. Find us all the time at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. Open up a new tab and check out what the whole team is doing. Please consider contributing to the Media Research Center as well. And visit the store. You can find us all the time on YouTube, where they do censor us. And of course, find us inside Facebook, on TikTok, and on Instagram, and on X. And if you want to find me on Gab, I'm at Gardner Goldsmith on Gab. And on X, you can find me as at Gard Goldsmith. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please share the videos. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.